The high-pitched, melodic scream of the Yamaha Inline-4 was once the undisputed soundtrack of championship glory. For decades, it was the soul of the Iwata factory, a machine defined by its surgical precision and corner speed dominance. But in the modern era of motorsports, that beautiful song has been drowned out by the brutal, mechanical roar of the V4 engines. As the 2026 season approached, a chilling realization settled over the Yamaha garage. Tradition was no longer a badge of honor, it was a weight dragging them to the back of the grid. Behind closed doors, the pressure from their star rider Toprak Razgatlıoğlu had reached a breaking point. He wasn't just asking for more power, he was demanding a total technical revolution. Toprak is a rider who lives on the limit of physics, a man whose stop-and-go style requires a bike that can punch out of corners like a heavyweight fighter. For 2 seasons, he had been fighting a losing battle, watching his rivals disappear on the straights while he risked everything just to stay within slipstream range. The internal data was undeniable. The Inline-4 had reached its ceiling. To save their future and keep their generational talent from walking away, Yamaha had to do the unthinkable. They had to kill their darling. They had to build a V4. This wasn't just a mid-season upgrade, it was a desperate multi-million-dollar gamble to rewrite the DNA of a racing icon. The decision sent shockwaves through the paddock. Critics claimed Yamaha was losing its identity, while fans feared that the soul of the M1 would be sacrificed at the altar of top speed. But for Toprak, this was the only path forward. He knew that the championship isn't won in the graceful sweeps of a corner, but in the violent acceleration that follows. Yet, as the first blueprints were finalized, a new fear emerged within the technical team. Building a V4 was one thing, tamming it for a rider who relies on front-end feel was another entirely. The stakes could not be higher as the team packed their crates for Thailand. Everything Yamaha had built over the last 30 years was being cast aside for a prototype that few had even seen in the flesh. The air in Iwata was thick with the scent of uncertainty, and as the planes touched down in Buriram, the tension was palpable. The world was watching, waiting to see if Yamaha's heresy would be a stroke of genius or a catastrophic mistake. But as the garage doors at the Chang International Circuit slowly creaked open, the first reports from the mechanics suggested that something was already going wrong. The transition from an Inline-4 to a V4 configuration is not a simple engine swap. It is a total structural metamorphosis. It affects the center of gravity, the stiffness of the chassis, and the very way the rider communicates with the asphalt. Throughout the winter of 2025 into early 2026, Yamaha's secret laboratory in Japan became a 24-hour war room. Engineers who had spent their entire careers perfecting the Inline-4 were suddenly tasked with mastering a platform they had ignored for a generation. The challenge was immense. How do you give a rider like Toprak the explosive power of a V4 without losing the user-friendly character that made Yamaha famous? Initial dyno tests were promising in terms of raw horsepower, but the delivery was a nightmare. The V4 was a beast, aggressive, twitchy, and prone to violent wheelies that overwhelmed the electronics. Every time the engineers tried to smooth out the power curve, the top speed dropped, putting them right back where they started. Since the last closed-door test, reports indicated that Yamaha had been working tirelessly on a total revision of the combustion system. They weren't just looking for a faster bike, they were looking for a smarter one. They integrated new electronic mapping and refined the aerodynamic package to keep the front wheel on the ground, but the simulation data only tells half the story. Toprak's feedback from the early prototype phase had been blunt. He reportedly felt disconnected from the rear tire, a death sentence for a rider who uses the throttle as a precision instrument. The technical team knew they had to deliver a breakthrough before the February 20th deadline. They redesigned the engine mounts, tweaked the firing order, and experimented with exotic alloys to manage the intense heat generated by the V4's rear cylinders. It was a race against the clock, fueled by the fear of another stagnant season. As the components were shipped to Thailand, a small group of senior engineers remained skeptical. There were whispers that the V4's vibration patterns were causing chatter that the current chassis couldn't absorb. If the bike was fast but unrideable, Toprak would be forced to override the machine, leading to the very crashes the team was trying to avoid. The V4 project was a house of cards, and Buriram was the wind that would decide if it stood or fell. However, what the public didn't know was that a secret component had been added to the crate at the last minute, a part that some believed could change everything or break the bike entirely. The Chang International Circuit in Buriram is a place of extremes. It is a technical masterpiece designed to punish both man and machine. With its massive stop-and-go sections and long, blistering straights, it was chosen by Yamaha for one reason: there is nowhere to hide here. If the V4 engine truly had the lungs to compete, it would show on the timing screens. If it had stability issues under hard braking, Toprak would find them at 330 kilometers per hour. The heat in Thailand is a silent killer of electronics and engines alike, providing the ultimate stress test for a cooling system that was still in its infancy. February 20th, 2026 was marked in red on every calendar in the paddock. This wasn't just another test day, it was the moment of truth. The atmosphere was thick with humidity and high-stakes anxiety. Every rival team, Ducati, KTM, Aprilia, had their eyes fixed on the blue garage. They knew that if Yamaha cracked the V4 code, the balance of power in MotoGP would shift overnight. For Yamaha, this was a golden opportunity to prove they were no longer lagging behind in the engine performance war. They needed more than just a fast lap. They needed a statement of intent. The technical team focused on three pillars for the Buriram Test: power distribution, corner exit traction, and throttle response. The Inline-4 was famous for its buttery exit, allowing the rider to pick up the bike and go. The V4 by nature is more explosive. In the hands of a lesser rider, this would lead to excessive wheel spin and ruined tires. But Toprak isn't a lesser rider. He is a specialist in managing chaos. The team spent the morning sessions dialing in the new fly-by-wire settings, trying to find that elusive sweet spot where the bike felt like a Yamaha but moved like a Ducati. As the sun reached its peak over the circuit, the sound of the new engine echoed through the grandstands, a deep guttural growl that sounded nothing like the Yamahas of old. The telemetry data began to flow back to the monitors, and the engineers' faces were unreadable. The top speeds were up, but the lap times were inconsistent. Something was missing. The bike was fast on the straights, but Toprak was struggling in the technical sector too. Just as the team prepared for a long debrief, a sudden silence fell over the garage as Toprak pulled into the pits and climbed off the bike without saying a word. Toprak Razgatlıoğlu is not just a rider, he is a force of nature. His style is a violent ballet of late braking and extreme lean angles. He's the only man on earth who can make a motorcycle look like it's defying the laws of physics. But in Buriram, the strain of being the savior of Yamaha was beginning to show. He wasn't just there to ride, he was there to judge. Every comment he made, every flick of his wrist, would dictate the direction of a multi-million-dollar development program. If he said no, the project would face a devastating setback. If he said yes, he was committing himself to a machine that was still largely an enigma. Inside the garage, the dynamic was intense. Toprak is known for his ability to feel the smallest vibrations, feedback that even the most advanced sensors can miss. He complained of a harshness in the power delivery that was upsetting the front end during his signature heavy braking. For Toprak, the front tire is everything. If he can't feel the limit of the grip, he can't perform his stoppy entries that make him so dangerous. The V4's weight distribution was shifting the load in ways his muscle memory wasn't used to, creating a psychological barrier that he had to break through. The media criticism was already mounting. Pundits wondered if Toprak was the right man for a development role or if his unique style would lead Yamaha down a technical dead end. The pressure from the fans on social media added another layer of noise. Everyone had an opinion on how the V4 should behave, but only one man was actually sitting on the rocket ship. Toprak's crew chief worked late into the night, analyzing the human element of the data. They weren't just tuning a bike, they were tuning a relationship between a man and a new philosophy. As the test progressed into the afternoon, the communication between Toprak and his lead technician became more animated. They were seen pointing at the engine casing and the rear swing arm, debating the trade-off between raw acceleration and mid-corner stability. The golden ratio seemed just out of reach. Toprak was pushing, taking risks that most wouldn't take in a test session, desperate to find the limit. But then, during a flying lap in the final hour, the onboard cameras captured a moment that left the entire engineering team breathless. In the world of MotoGP, the difference between a podium and a disaster is measured in millimeters and milliseconds. At 200 miles per hour, the Yamaha V4 was entering a realm where physics becomes a different beast. In Buriram, the team began experimenting with radical new aerodynamic components, winglets and ground effect fairings designed specifically to work with the V4's torque. The goal was to create enough downforce to keep the bike stable without creating so much drag that it neutralized the new engine's power. It was a delicate high-speed balancing act. The technical analysis focused heavily on the electronic mapping. In previous tests, Toprak had struggled with the way the engine braking felt. On an Inline-4, the engine braking is smooth and predictable. On a V4, it can be aggressive, causing the rear wheel to hop and slide. For a rider like Toprak, who uses the rear wheel to steer the bike into corners, this was a critical flaw. The engineers introduced a new predictive mapping system designed to anticipate Toprak's braking pressure and adjust the engine's back torque in real time. This was cutting-edge technology, and its success was far from guaranteed. As the lap times began to drop, the atmosphere in the paddock shifted from anxiety to cautious optimism. The V4 was showing its teeth. The straight-line speed was finally competitive with the Ducatis, and for the first time in years, a Yamaha wasn't being overtaken like it was standing still. But fast doesn't always mean winning. The tire wear data was concerning. The explosive power of the V4 was chewing through the rear Michelin tires at a rate that would make a full race distance impossible. The engineers had found the speed, but they had lost the efficiency. Toprak returned to the track for a long-run simulation, a grueling 15-lap stint in the tie heat to see how the bike behaved as the fuel load dropped and the tires degraded. This is where championships are won not in the glory of a single fast lap but in the grit of the final 5 laps. The garage was silent as they watched the sector times on the monitors. The first 5 laps were world-class. The next 5 were struggling. By lap 12, the telemetry showed a spike in engine temperature that triggered a warning light in the pits, forcing the team to make a split-second decision that could end the test prematurely. As the sun began to set over the Buriram skyline, the paddock became a hive of rumors and speculation. In the high-stakes world of motorsports, secrets are the most valuable currency, and every insider had a theory about Yamaha's V4. Some claimed the engine was a masterpiece that would dominate the season. Others whispered that the project was plagued by unfixable vibrations that were destroying the chassis. Behind the scenes, there were reports of political tension within the Yamaha garage. The old guard of engineers who favored the Inline-4 were reportedly at odds with the new wave, pushing for the V4 revolution. The rumors suggested that the internal conflict was affecting the development pace. Decisions that should have taken hours were taking days. Strategy disagreements over how to handle Toprak's feedback were creating a rift between the Japanese factory and the trackside crew. In the hospitality units, rival team managers were already playing mind games, questioning whether Yamaha had panicked by switching engine configurations so close to the season opener. The psychological pressure on the entire organization was immense. Even more concerning were the whispers regarding Toprak's contract. Some believed that his commitment to the V4 project was contingent on the Buriram results. If the bike didn't perform, would the most exciting rider in the world start looking for a seat elsewhere? The loyalty narrative was being tested. Yamaha knew they weren't just fighting for a trophy, they were fighting to keep their superstar. Every mistake made by a mechanic, every miscommunication in the garage felt like a step toward a potential collapse. The public narrative on social media was equally polarized. Fans were debating whether Yamaha was selling out its heritage, but inside the garage there was no room for nostalgia. There was only the data. The engineering team worked late into the tie night, fueled by caffeine and the fear of failure. They replayed the telemetry from Toprak's long run thousands of times, looking for the ghost in the machine, the reason for the overheating and the tire degradation. Just as they thought they had found the solution, a leaked report from a rival team's spy suggested that Yamaha's V4 had a fundamental flaw that no amount of mapping could fix. The final hours of the February 20th test were a blur of intensity. The track temperature had dropped slightly, providing the perfect window for one last-time attack. This was the moment where all the research, all the revisions, and all the sweat would be distilled into a single number on a screen. Toprak lined up at the end of the pit lane, his visor down, his focus absolute. He wasn't just riding for himself. He was riding for the hundreds of people in Iwata who had bet their careers on this V4 engine. The lap began with a violence that startled even the seasoned observers. Toprak threw the bike into turn 1 with a ferocity that suggested he finally trusted the machine. The V4 roared down the long straight, hitting a top speed that sent a murmur through the crowd. In the technical sectors, the bike looked composed, the aero was working, the electronics were holding the beast at bay. As he crossed the finish line, the screen lit up in purple. It was a staggering time, a lap that put Yamaha back in the conversation as a genuine title contender. But the aftermath of a test is about more than just a lap time. In the debrief that followed, Toprak's expression was one of exhaustion mixed with a new kind of respect. He had found the golden ratio, but it had required a level of physical effort that was unsustainable for a full race. The V4 project was a success, but it was a raw success. It was a weapon that was now capable of winning, but it was a weapon that required a master to wield it without it exploding in their hands. The doubts from early development had been addressed, but new, more complex questions had taken their place. As the team packed up the crates to leave Thailand, the foundation for Yamaha's future had been laid. The V4 era had officially begun. They had proven that they could build the power, now they had to prove they could survive it. The heresy had been validated, but the season ahead promised to be the most grueling in the factory's history. The war for the 2026 championship was no longer a distant dream, it was a looming reality. And as Toprak walked away from the garage, he knew that while he finally had the engine he wanted, the real battle had only just begun.